Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. So today we're going to be hacking together a bit of a Remix clone that runs natively on Deno. So Remix has already got a way to compile down to Deno, but we want it to run natively, so there's no kind of build step. And the format we're going to do this, we're going to kind of just take an existing, very basic Remix app. We're going to strip everything that's Remix about it, strip everything that's Node.js about it, but keep the actual code base the same. And then we're just going to try and get it to work with Deno. And I'm just going to be copying and pasting kind of the code snippets for this. We're not going to dive into every single line of code, but instead we're just going to kind of focus on the flow of code and what kind of the architecture of the code, if you will, and basically what it takes to build a framework like this. So yeah, I hope you enjoy it, and let's get right into it. So this is the application that we're going to be building. It's just standard Remix app, very, very simple. I've tried to kind of keep a subset, or else we'd be here all day trying to rebuild Remix, of course. But we've got a couple of roots. And we've got different styles on the different roots, right? So we have the root here, and we have the /index file. So this is just /index at home, with its own kind of styles. We can see, you know, if you look at the source code, we can see the meta functions, you can see the links functions, and if we go into things like index here, that's just a standard page. But then we're going to see some nested routing as well as dynamic roots, right? So if I go to this about section, which we see here, we can see there's a loader function which returns an object. So this could be an async kind of, you know, a fetch, but in this case I'm just hard coding some colors. So that's returned. We're using use loader data to get those that data. And then if we hit any one of these, what we're going to do is we're going to go into this dynamic root. So that dynamic root is going to be passed into the meta function, the loader function, and then we're going to use that and just basically show you the result. So this of course could be anything over here. This is the basics. This is kind of, I'd say, the kind of the core minimum functionality of Remix, and this is all running on Remix right now. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go over high level how we're going to structure our own framework. I'm going to call this Reno, so it's a remix of Deno. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to delete the Remix things and get started on it. So the way this is going to work, I've just got a little diagram here, an Excel draw, just before we get into any of the kind of the coding things. It's going to be quite simple. The entry point to these kind of frameworks is just basically the URL, right? The path basically that's coming in. So at the very top here, we've got basically the path that's going to come into our server. And it's either going to be one of two different types of paths in our case. It's either going to be a static path or it's going to be one that's looking for roots, right? So the static path here, we're just going to determine if it's a static path. We're going to kind of hack this together. So we're just going to check if it's got an extension name, that we're just going to assume it's a static path. If it comes in, then it's going to go to the left here. It's just going to load the static file, and that's literally the case of just reading the file from the directory. I guess usually it's from the public folder. We're going to fall back also to the app folder for the styles, but we'll talk about that later. And if it's not a static file, i.e. it's anything else, then there's a bit of work involved. Then we need to do is, first thing we need to do is match the roots, right? So we need to see, well, what roots does this match? So we know that if it's /about/red, we know that, you know, we know to look for a /about.tsx, which we have. We know to look at a /about/red TSX or an equivalent. In this case, this is kind of a bit of regular expression matching. And then we need to look for a /about/red/index TSX, because we always look for a kind of a nested folder. In this case, that doesn't exist, but that's fine. So that's kind of the three directories or files we'd look for if we had this specific URL. Anyways, we need to kind of figure that out. We need to see what are all the roots available. We need to kind of match them. And in this case, there's only two matching paths. Once we've got the matching paths, we need to kind of load the modules, and we need to do a bit of kind of context work, right? So of those two modules, we need to see, all right, do they have a meta function? Do they have a links function? Does it have a loader function? And then we need to basically process all those. And the way I'm doing that here, keeping it very simple, I've just got one piece of context sitting at the kind of top of the application, and that's just going to have basically a list for each different function here. So the meta function, each of our nested roots, so starting at the root, is going to have an object. It's going to call the function, come back, store that data, and then the next one, the about, is going to store that data, the about index, you know, so on and so forth. Same with the links, same with the loader, and then we're just going to keep a counter on the kind of where we are in the tree, where we are in the nested kind of roots, and that's how we know how to access the specific data, especially in the loader function for this component, right? Anyways, if that doesn't make any sense, that's fine. We're gonna go into it in a bit more detail. The final thing, we just need to render the roots. So yeah, that's enough of kind of the architecture side. Let's get into the coding. Cool, so let's close all these down and let's basically stop the app running. And what we're going to do first is we're just going to delete a bunch of files because we don't need a lot of these. Now we're jumping into Deno. So we're going to delete the cache build, node modules. We'll delete this build as well. We'll remove this ESLint because that's remix specific just now. Remove the package JSONs, remix, and of course Deno has first class support for TypeScript. So we're going to remove all of these. Next up, let's just update our .ignore, and the only thing I need to ignore here is the IntelliJ directory. And then I'm just going to go into the app, and we just need to change a few things here just to make this work. And so first of all, I'm not going to do any kind of client-side hydration. We're sending no JavaScript to the browser, so we can remove the entry client. Second of all, I need to change the roots ever so slightly. So where we see the styles import here, usually Remix kind of compiles that down and finds the asset. We're not going to have that in Deno land here because this is all, there's no kind of build step or anything. So we're just going to hard code the paths directly into the href. And this is going to be an absolute path. So I'm going to do that, and I'm just going to find, I think I had another link somewhere here, maybe in the root. Yeah, so we had one in the root here. So let's just paste that in. Final one is, I believe I had one elsewhere. No, I think that's it. Great, so that's all that. Final thing we can do here is just remove everything that's Remix related. So let's take this. I'm just going to do kind of a find and replace Remix run node to Reno. So everything's just going to come from Reno, replace all that. And then we're going to do the exact same thing for this Remix run React. So Reno, replace all. So that's fine. So now all the imports are just coming in from Reno instead of Remix run. And I think that's everything there. Let's just make sure everything's okay. All these are fine. One more thing, let's just change the entry server. So again, our app's gonna be super simple. It's not gonna have all the extended functionality that Remix does. So we can basically remove a few things. So all we need here is the context, basically. So we can pass in the context. We don't need to pass in the URL for R1. Let's call this Reno server instead of Remix server. So that should be fine. And then let's just hard code the headers because we don't need to worry about that. And we'll just leave the default status, which should be 200. So we'll just hard code the header here. And I think that should be everything. Let's move on to Deno stuff, right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna close all this and we'll just start off with a standard index TSX file because that's typically where you start with Deno. So actually we'll just do a TypeScript file here. And our entry point is going to be this index file. So what we're going to do is we're going to import the handler that we just created from the entry server, and then what we're going to do is we're going to have a start function in our Reno app. So yeah, let's enable Deno support. So let's import start from Reno, just like that. And then we're just going to call the start function, and we're going to pass in the handler, right? And remember, this handler just comes from the entry server here. Cool. So let's close some of these files. And what we'll do actually is let's just make sure kind of everything in the Deno side is working. So let's just console log hello world here. Hello world. I'm just going to open up a terminal, and we should just be able to run index. That's fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run this, and I'm going to do -a to allow everything. And then I'm going to just do --watch indexed ts. So this is just going to basically keep watching it. So it'll just keep refreshing as I change the code. So if I just do exclamation marks, it's just going to restart the server. Perfect. So that should all be working. So next up, I'm just going to copy over a Deno JSON file and an import map, and this is just going to help us a couple of things. Just going to help the IDE recognize and kind of help a bit with autocomplete in terms of the libraries that we're using. So this is just the compiler options from TypeScript, and then the import map here. We're just adding our we've got 3 imports here. 2 of them are React, and 1 of them is going to be directly to our Reno. So this just lets us import using this kind of shorthand instead of pasting these URLs everywhere. So that's everything there. And of course, we just need to make our actual Reno file. So let's do Reno, and this is going to be TSX. And like I said, we're going to copy a few things in, and we're going to kind of walk through them as we go along. So I'm going to copy over a few, all the imports that we need. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste in all the types. We're not going to focus too much on the types. I've kind of hacked them in as well, but they sort of look similar to the Remix ones. You can see meta function, links function, loader function, etc. So again, if you want to have a look at any of this in detail, I'll leave the link to the GitHub. And then final thing, just before we start our actual code, is we're just going to hard code in a few constants, right? So this is in Remix, of course, it lets you change the base path of where your application is. We're just hard coding it as the current directory, but then everything here is relative, so you could in theory change that. So there's just the static, the roots and the app directories. So the entry point, like we said, is the start function. So let's go ahead and start with the start function, right? So the start function is going to look something like this. Let's close this up here. It's going to take in the client handler. The very first thing we're going to do is we're just going to kind of get a copy of all the available routes to us, right? And we're just going to compute this at the start because, well, when you start the server, we know the routes available, so we don't need to compute it on every request. So we're just going to compute it once. We're going to kind of pass it in to every handler that comes in, and then later on we'll kind of do a bit of a comparison, right? So before we do any of this, what we'll do is we'll just console.log. We're going to log what this looks like because we are doing a couple of things here. So let's do that, and I'm going to copy over the roots, the sorted roots function here. There we go. So we don't need to look at it in too much detail, but the first thing we're going to do is we've got this sorted roots function, and what we do is in order to match the roots, we need to have some sort of hierarchy. We need to know basically which ones to match first, because we might match multiple roots at the same time, but we obviously want the kind of the roots with more paths, kind of the more granular roots first. So this is all this is doing. It's kind of, you know, guessing that the longer paths will be higher priority than the shorter paths, and then I'm kind of ranking the index files lower than the non-index files. This definitely won't work, or I'm pretty sure it won't work for most scenarios, but in this case, this is going to be absolutely fine. Obviously, we want something a bit more elegant than that, but for now, that's fine. And you might have noticed this map as regex, and that's because instead of just keeping the straight up paths, with the dynamic roots, which we have just inside that bout, so this name, what we want to do instead is we want to turn that into a regular expression so that we can kind of try and match it against the URL itself, right? So that's all it's doing. If we log this out, I believe we should be able to log this out and we can actually see what that looks like. So I think that's in the terminal here. So let's just see what's going on here. So start from Reno. I think I need to start it again with the, now that I've copied and pasted the import maps, Reno server, of course. So it's looking for a Reno server, which we don't have. So let's just copy over kind of a dummy Reno server. I'll pop this in just above the types here. So all this is going to do is just going to return hello world, and then it should have something called start, and this is going to be a default import. So let's actually just remove that there. Go in here, that's fine. So we can see this, the logging here. This sorted routes is basically just returning the paths of all the routes that we have. So this is just all the routes that you can see in the directory, nothing special going on there. But then what it's done is it's, of course, sorted it, but it's added this regular expression part. And for most routes that are not dynamic, it's just going to be the exact same. So we match that simply. But for the ones with this kind of dynamic entry, you can see that all it's done is it's basically replacing to regex. It's replacing the $sign here and taking the name, and then it's just replacing it with this kind of syntax here. And all this is doing is it's creating a regular expression group. It's matching all characters, and then it's just giving it a name. So that way later on when we match, we can get name, semicolon, and then the actual value. And that way it's in a group, we can pass it into, you know, to all the components, and we can kind of take it in from there. So next step, let's remove this console log and let's actually serve something, right? So we're using the standard library serve, takes in a request, returns a response. The response is going to be abstracted away by two handlers. So we're going to have a custom handler ourselves here, and this is going to handle like the static files and preparing the context and stuff. And then of course, we're just going to kind of delegate to the handler here. This is ultimately what's going to actually render a response, right? So let's go over here to Reno. So we're going to create our own handler here. So let's just copy over a very kind of simple handler, and that looks something like this. And this will look exactly like the Excel-draw kind of picture here. We're just getting the path. We're checking if it's static by just checking if it's got an extension name. And if it is, then we're going to render something static. So we'll do that quickly now. And then otherwise, we're going to go into this kind of render routes flow, right? So if we head over to the render static files, so we'll just copy some of these over. So this is actually very simple, right? What we're going to do, this render static file, all it does is it reads the static files. And this is just going into just using the Deno standard, it's just using the Deno library, sorry. And it's just trying to read from the static directory plus the path, nothing kind of more complicated there. The only caveat here is I'm trying to read from the static directory, which is the public folder first. So for example, there's a favicon, I'm going to read that. If it doesn't exist there, we're going to read the app directory directly. So this is kind of things for styles. Of course, this means you'll be able to read the source code, but yeah, we're hacking to this together. It's not too big a deal. And I think that's pretty much everything. We take that, we convert it to a readable stream, and then we just, we've got a list of, or a map of extension names, CSS and files, so we can just return that. So In terms of returning static files, this should be pretty straightforward. So let's actually just test that out. Let's fill in a dummy render roots function. So what we'll do for now, the render roots function is just going to just add some space here. It's just going to return the client handler, which is the entry server, but we're going to pass in an empty context, of course. And obviously when this renders the Reno server, which right now is just going to return hello world. So in theory, if I make sure this is still running and I go to localhost 8000, we should see hello world because it's going to the Reno kind of server component here with no context, with nothing. That's fine. And if I go favicon.ico, we should see the favicon, which is perfect. And actually we could have seen that up there. And if I go to something like styles index CSS, we should see that. And of course, like I said, we could in theory see the I think it's the root TSX, but again, we're not too bothered about that. At least we've got the static files working. Now let's focus on the kind of the roots flow. So I'm going to scroll up here. We'll close this for a moment. Now the roots one is going to be a bit kind of tougher to test because as soon as we start importing things, everything's going to break because it's going to expect all the components and everything to be there. So we're just going to have to kind of log things as we go along and yeah, just explain it as best I can. So just bear with me a bit here. So I'm going to be copying and pasting again some of the things that we need. So we know that as soon as we come into the render roots, we know that we want to, you know, from our accelerator, we want to match the roots first, right? That's the first thing we want to do. So let's do that. Let me copy over this function here. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to get the matched roots from a match root function. And I'm just going to copy over a few functions here. Hopefully I get all these functions. There we go. So that should be everything there. And I'll just, I think I've got a duplicate of that. So the render roots here, we'll come in with the match roots, the format path here. So what we're going to do is just going to very kind of simply adjust the path slightly to make it easier for us to kind of parse them. And all we're doing is basically we're adding an index, right? So we know that about red will also match about red slash index. And if it was just slash about, we know that we also want to match slash about slash index. So we're just adding that in to make life easier. And then the match roots function here is literally just going to, first of all, it's going to add the root because we always want that. And then it's just going to take the path. And what it's actually going to do is it's going to take the path. Like I said, it's going to determine every single route that it's rendering. So if we console log the paths here, I think actually, I wonder if that's just going to show up like that. So let's just check if I refresh this page. So in this case, localhost slash is just going to match slash index TSX, right? So that's the only thing. That's the only thing it's going to match. So that's this path to path, which is basically splitting everything. If you go slash about, what it's going to do is it's going to say, well, okay, we know there's a slash about.tsx, and because we've added the index, we know there's also going to be there should be, or we should check for a slash about slash index. Again, if we go on slash red, it's just going to keep going, and basically it's going to get every path that could possibly be rendered, right? So that's simple, path to paths. And then what we can do here is we're just going to loop over all the roots, and this is the roots that we determined earlier on, and we're just going to do a match with these paths against the regular expression. And if it matches, basically we're just going to return the path as well as the groups. And again, the groups is just going to take the name of the regular expression. In this case, we only have the one dynamic root, which is name, and the value. So by the end of this, what we should basically have, if I scroll up and if I console log here, the matched roots. If I go to about red, we've basically here matched 3 roots. We've always got the root, and that's this guy here. That's literally just hard-coded data. And then we have in this case, the about TSX, and then we have the name, and we can see the group here, name is equal to red. So now that's going to help us pass it in when we're going to render this root. Cool. So let's again close all this down. Let's go back up to our render roots function. So now that we have our matching, we need to do basically all the context work. And this is actually a lot easier than you think, right? So let me copy in again a few more methods, and it's going to look something like this, right? So let me just copy this in, and I'll copy in the context. There we go. All we need to do now, we've got all the roots that we need to work with, and we've basically got the paths of those. We're just going to go ahead and import them, right? We're going to import all the paths, and now we have a bunch of modules. Once we've got the modules, then we can basically go through each of the modules and extract the data we need from them. So we check if they've got meta functions. And if so, we keep them in a list. We check if they've got links, keep them in a list. We check if they've got loaded data, keep them in a list. And then we're just going to pass these all into a context object and pass it to the client handler. And we can see later on, after this, it's just a case of accessing context, right? So let's remove all these guys. Let's go down here, and we'll just copy and paste in again the as modules functions, or basically all these functions here. And again, these are super simple. So if I just scroll up here, you can, at a quick glance, you can just see this is just looping over it and just doing an import. The meta one is just looping over it, calling the meta function if it has it with the parameters, and it's just returning that. The links one, again, there's no parameters getting passed in. We just check for the links. This is going to be a list of lists. And then the loader data, again, is just calling the module loader if it has it with the parameters, and just mapping it to a list of objects. So that should be everything there. If we go into the render roots function now, so if we try to log things now, it's all going to break, because as it tries to do the imports here, it's going to look for all the components. So the root one, for example, is going to look for the meta components, the links component. So there's no need in trying to log it now. But what we'll do is let's just make those components, because they're quite simple to understand. Cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over on the right hand side, and I'm going to basically, again, I'm going to copy and paste, and this is going to be the final piece basically, and we'll walk through this final piece, I believe. So if I try to, refresh this, yeah, of course it's going to get to that links one. It's just not going to like it. So what we'll do is we'll go into here. We'll go near the bottom. Yeah, just beside this Reno server, and I'm going to paste in a bunch of components, including the Reno server, so we can remove the previous one that was just returning hello world, and we'll start off there actually. So the Reno server now is going to be returning a context. That context is, again, it's just the context that we were just looking at. It's the exact same object. This entry context is just a list of roots, a list of meta data, a list of links, and a list of loader data. That's all we have, right? So we've already created those, and that's all we're going to be passing into the, that's all that's getting passed into this Reno server, right? So that's the value there, context getting passed in. And then the children, we know we want to render the root first, because that's always going to be the entry point, and that will have the outlet, which we'll see later on, which will render its children. And we're just going to wrap the children in a count context, right? And this is just my kind of, again, hacked together way of keeping track of which child we're on and which context list to fetch, right? So this is just a simple counter. It's going to start off at 0. So we're going to wrap the children around in that. And that's basically the starting point. So the very first root route, called it root route to make it more clear, is just going to access the meta at 0, the links at 0, the loader at 0. And in fact, because we're bunching all these together, we don't actually ever really need to access them. It's mainly the loader data, right? Once it gets into there, it's going to go into the outlet. And again, the outlet here, we can see, so in the root, it's going to get down to the outlet for the children. We'll look at the other ones later on. All it's doing is it's going to say, hey, fetch me the roots from the context, fetch me the count, which is going to be 0 at the first point. I know that I want to render the next child or the next root, so just count plus 1. If it's there, get me the default export, which is a component, and then just render that inside another count provider. So it's kind of like nested count providers, and this count provider is going to be count plus 1, so that the next time there's an outlet, it's going to be at 1, so on, so forth, right? So that should be hopefully pretty simple. The links component here, which is the one that we add at the top, the links in the meta, super simple. We're just going to say, hey, get me all the links, flatten them all out, and just map over them and just pop them in the header. Simple as that. Same with the meta one. Slightly more code here, because we're going to take all the meta ones, we're going to reduce it into one object. And actually, there's a slight caveat here. If it's a title, then pop in the title. Otherwise, it's a meta tag. But same concept. Just go through everything. We don't need to access each specific one. And then we have the loader data, which is how we access each individual one inside a component. And all that's going to do, it's even more simple, get all the loader data, context, get the count, and just fetch me the data for this specific component. Nice. And then the final one here is just this, the remix link function, which all I'm doing is kind of abstracting out an A tag, right? So that's basically all the different components I think that we need here. So this should be pretty simple now. So when it comes into the entry server, just to recap, we're going to have all the context that we've built up by looping through the roots and calling all the functions. And then we're going to pass this to the Reno server. And then the Reno server, every single root in the Reno server can just access whatever it needs to because it has the context. So let's refresh this here. That seems to be working. So if I go back to /, and what I'll do is at the same time is I'm just going to log out, I think, the context. That might help you understand. So if I go for the render roots, and let's just here console.log the context, and we'll have a look at that. So if I refresh this guy here, this is just the home page. We can see we have a list of roots. In this case, we have the root, and then the /index. And you can see the module, the different functions there, etc. And then we have all the meta tags. So we only have the root has the meta tags, the second one doesn't. And then we have some styles from the first one, and this is where we kind of, and we have no loader data yet. if we go into home, about, we've got some loader data here in the second subroot or nested root. And of course, if we go into here, and we scroll all the way down, then we can see the metadata, and we can see the name red, which is passed in from the loader and then into the params here. So yeah, now you've got a fully functioning, semi-fully functioning framework. Cool. So I think that's just about everything. The final thing, you can have a play around with the network tab here. If you refresh this, you can just see there's no JavaScript being shipped to the page. So it's very nice, kind of nice and clean. It's just the index HTML file, or sorry, the HTML file, and then you can just see the styles and the favicon. So it's actually kind of a really good starting point before things start to get messy and complicated. So it's a nice kind of clean website. And yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to cover in this video. Of course, this doesn't cover nearly all the features that a proper framework should have, and it's going to be very buggy. We've hacked it together, but hopefully this kind of gives you an idea of what to think about when building a framework like this, and just understanding the core of it. It's just a router with with a bit of additional kind of functionality. So I think I'm going to wrap it up there. So thank you very much for watching. Have a good day, and I will see you in the next one.